Alright, so yesterday I did this in 38 minutes. I'm going to try and do it faster than that today. We got so far as last time, I showed you guys these things, right? The CGIs of these guys?
Yeah.
Okay. And we talked about the politics, the 5 regimes. I had to look here on the board. I've got something written here, and this is the key I want you to get from the regimes. The idea is that each of these systems degenerates into an inferior system. And I'll say it again. Each system degenerates into an inferior system. Each system is an imitation of the one that came before it. And that's the real key. Each system is an imitation of the one that came before it. So for example, you look at the aristocracy, which is ruled by merit. If it's ruled by merit, you've got these guys, the philosopher kings. This is ideal. Now, right below it, you've got timocracy. And timocracy is ruled by honor. And you can look at it and go, well, honor, that's kind of like a virtue, right? I mean, if the philosopher kings are ruling off of wisdom, reason, and virtue, well, honor is a virtue. So it's almost as good, right? It's not quite as good. But, I mean, you get a cheeseburger with 2 pieces of cheese. It's not as good as 3 pieces, but still pretty good, right? That's the idea. So the timocracy is kind of like a degenerate imitation of the one that comes before it, the ideal one, which is the aristocracy. And the further down you go, the more degenerate the imitation is. The more degenerate the imitation is. So the oligarchy, wealth, is kind of like honor. So we worship money, wealth, and you can think of it like, well, you kind of get wealth in a way that's honorable, maybe. Not really. We know that that's not true. And we know that wealth is very far now from wisdom, reason, and virtue. So the further down we go, the further away we get from the ideal state. Democracy, it's massive, it's not quite wealth. It's a degenerate version of wealth. And then, of course, when we get to the end, being ruled by one person is a highly degenerate version of being ruled by many people. But you can see how each of these steps down is incremental. There's not a massive difference between a timocracy and an aristocracy. There isn't a massive difference, though, between an oligarchy and a timocracy either. And there's not a massive difference between a democracy and an oligarchy. But man, there's a tremendous difference between a tyranny and an aristocracy. These systems degenerate slowly. So Socrates believed that this is where Sparta was, and then eventually Spartans, if they didn't take their government seriously, would end up as an oligarchy. And it makes sense, because when things are going super, super well, one of the last things people want to do is get involved in politics. Because if things are going very well for you, you've got job opportunities, you're getting a bunch of money because things are going well, so you're earning a bunch of money. Who the hell wants to go spend their time on politics? Wouldn't you rather be playing your Xbox? Or wouldn't you rather be in the metaverse? Yeah, it isn't until things are going terribly that all of a sudden we turn around and go, wait, my house is on fire. What the hell happened? Well, the house is on fire. I can see that. How did that happen, though? Well, we started off as philosopher kings. Well then, geez Louis, well what the hell now? Can someone please come along and fix this? Oh, we'll get someone to fix it for you. No problem. And that's the danger of the tyranny. Now when things degenerate to such a point that now we kind of freak out. We screw things up so badly that now we look around for the adult in the room. Who can fix this? But, the adult in the room is the person who stands up and goes, I can do this for you. Really? Oh my goodness. And then we admire that person because of their strength. At first, wow, they're strong. We can admire that. We admire strength, right? It's not quite honor, and it's not quite wealth. In other words, they haven't necessarily demonstrated that they have success in our society, and they're not one of us, maybe, or maybe they aren't. Yeah, maybe they're not one of us, but we pretend like they are. Kind of like the forest. The forest always votes for the axe because it looks like them, right? But all the while, what is the axe doing? It's chopping the forest down. But that's okay. It looks like us. So even though it's destroying us, we'll continue to vote for it because It's strong. It's a strong version of us. Problem is that the tyrant comes into power, and there's one thing we know about tyrants. They don't like giving up power. It's like anybody who goes into government. Why do people go into government? Even if they say things like, because I want to make things better. So you want power so that you can make things better. You believe that if you're given enough power, you can fix everything. Yes. Yes. So it's really what it comes down to. You have to have that megalomaniac spirit to pursue political power. You have to believe that you have the answers, even if we play humble. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers. Yes, you are. You are. You won't say that because that's not how a tyrant comes into power. You have to pretend to be one of the people. Even if you're the axe, you have to make sure you have a wooden handle, otherwise the force won't let you in. So these are all, each of these is an imitation of the ones that came before it, but not a good imitation. All right, so now the trial and death of Socrates. Oh, wait. Sorry. There. All right. The trial and death of Socrates. Very famous painting. This is supposed to be Socrates. And back here are his students. All right. By the way, when you look at this, when you're looking at Socrates here, what's it look like he's... What do you think of it when you're looking at it? What does he exude here? Power. It's interesting. Yeah. Old dude's going to use power because he's got some kind of, where's he pointing to? Let's find out. All right, trial and death of Socrates. The best known story of Socrates' trial and death comes from Plato. And it comes in the form of 4 books. You don't need to know the names of the 4 books, but if you're interested, my goodness, you should read these at some point in your life. They're not long, and they're really powerful. Euthyphro, the Apology, the Criton, and of course the Phaedo. So the Euthyphro is when he's showing up into court and he's talking to this guy Euthyphro, telling him what he's on trial for. And then his apology. An apology is not the way we think of an apology, like oh, I'm so sorry. An apology is a defense. So this is when he's on trial. That's his defense. And then during the penalty phase, Creo, and then finally his death scene, the Phaedo. So I know I'm ruining it for you. He dies. So here's the story. In 399 BC, and again I want you to know that date, 470 to 399 BC. Those are the years of his life and death. 470 he's born, 399 he dies. So in 399 BC, Socrates is called to court, and he has to answer for 2 very, very serious accusations. The first of which is impiety. Impiety means being irreligious, essentially offending the gods. And he's charged with not worshiping the gods of Athens. Specifically, I guess there are 2 charges. One of them is that he refuses to recognize the gods of Athens. And then secondly, he introduces foreign gods. In other words, he brings in another god that the Athenians do not recognize, called as Daimonian, which I'll say more on the next slide. So in short, he refuses to recognize the Athenian gods, Zeus and so forth. And he brings in a new god that they've never heard of before, called his Daimonian. And his Daimonian is what we think of today as a conscience. He actually admits to this. He says, listen, I've got this voice in my head, and he says, I don't know if it's a god, I don't know if it's myself, but there's a voice in my head that when I'm about to go too far on something, it grabs me and pulls me back and says, hey, Socrates, chill. Don't say what you're about to say. Don't do what you're about to do. It doesn't work in the reverse, though. It doesn't tell him, hey, do this, do this, do this. It only stops him from doing things that he's going to get into trouble for. I really need one of these. And then secondly, he's charged with corrupting the youth. Corrupting the youth. So, impiety and corrupting the youth. The 2 things for which he was charged. And by the way, both of these carry the death penalty if he's convicted. And it makes sense, because if you believe in the gods of Athens, then you understand that the gods are all powerful. So if you piss off the gods, what are they going to do? Punish you. How are they going to punish the city? Well, we read a bunch of stories about it last time. Like, how are you going to punish the city if you're a god? How do gods usually punish cities?
Flooding.
What's that? Flooding. fire, destruction. They're going to destroy the city and everything and everybody in it. So if you're offending the gods, that's a very serious thing, because you're endangering the lives of all of the Athenians. That carries the death penalty. And then corrupting the youth also carries the death penalty, because the future of any civilization is its youth. If you corrupt the youth, then you corrupt the next generation, which endangers that civilization. And with enough corrupted generations, a civilization falls apart. It ceases to exist. The only way you keep your civilization strong is to keep a strong youth. So both of these two things, impiety and corrupting the youth, carry the death penalty. So Socrates is up on some very significant charges. There were three people that were charged with, there were three people who brought charges against him. The one, we know all three of their names, but the one that always people seem to know is this guy Mellitus. Mellitus was it was said that he was a poet. And we have some things about him that maybe after the trial, some things that happened to him. It was reported that he was killed after the trial, but we don't really know what happens to this guy. All we know about him is that he was relatively young and that he was a poet. So he's the guy who actually verbally prosecuted Socrates. He was the one who went to the jury and presented the case. Interestingly, isn't it? He's a poet, which means he's good with words. Now, don't miss this. This is a really important repeating concept. Just like the oligarchy is a cheap imitation of the democracy, and just like the democracy is a cheap imitation of the oligarchy, the poet is a cheap imitation of the philosopher. The poet is someone who's great with words, but what does the poet essentially do? The poet essentially is a liar. As Plato says, all poets are liars. When you look outside the tree, and I say to you guys, the tree is crying. What am I saying to you? Tree has feelings? Tree has feelings. Yeah. And you look at the tree, and the tree's like, and does the tree really have a face? Is the tree really like, no, I'm making it up. I'm lying to you. Ah, but you know what, you're trying to explain it. Maybe, but the poet is not interested in truth in the same way that the philosopher is. The philosopher wants truth. The poet wants to arrive at something through feeling. Two very different things. So when Mellitus goes to prosecute Socrates, the philosopher is being prosecuted by the poet. The intellect is being prosecuted by the feelings. This is not a small thing. And so, in short, Socrates is given the opportunity to cross-examine Mellitus, and I might ask you his name on the quiz. So just make sure you have his name. And Socrates just tears him apart. Socrates, he essentially accuses Socrates of not believing in the gods. And then Socrates says, you say I don't believe in the gods, but you say I have this other god, this daimonion. And so you're saying I don't believe in the gods, but I'm introducing a god. Which is it? Do I believe in gods or not? And Mellitus says, I don't know. Really? And he comes down and says, I don't know. I have no idea, Socrates. I just know you're a bad dude and you're impious. Okay. So, I want you to have this word down. It's hard to see over there, maybe. Daimonion. D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N. D-A-I-M-O-N-I-O-N. Daimonion. And that's what it literally translated, it means a divine thing. That's his conscience. That's the thing that Socrates says speaks to him and tells him not to do things, to not go so far on certain things. So his defense is, he says, of course I believe in the gods. That's stupid. And yes, however, I do have this divine thing. He says, but I'm not saying it's a god. I'm not introducing it as a god. I'm not making a statue for it. I'm not going to build a temple for it. I have no idea what it is. All I can tell you is that it's something that I experience. And by the way, as a side note, this is a really powerful thing, man. We have this idea today like, well, yeah, everyone has a conscience. Everyone's got a conscience. That wasn't a common concept back then. The concept is really made popular in the Bible. I think it's in Jeremiah. I'm going to screw up the passage if I try to quote it. I want to say it's 31. But anyway, Jeremiah, in Jeremiah it says that God will put the law on the hearts of men. In other words, this is how we know what to do and what not to do. It says, well, God's going, fine, you've got a conscience now. And so it comes into being at that time. So whereas today we think like, well, it's just common knowledge. Everyone's got a conscience. We know exactly what that means. It wasn't such a common thing in ancient times. You weren't guided by conscience. You were supposed to be guided by reason. This is why, when you look back that far, they put such a strong emphasis on reason and intellect. Because that was the thing that was supposed to guide you, not conscience. Because there was no concept of conscience in the way that we have it today. So when Socrates introduces this idea of a divine something, that's unique. It's something newish. All right. And as far as corrupting the youth, I like his defenses. He provides several defenses. One of which he says, how am I corrupting the youth? Well, because you're their teacher. And he says, I'm not a teacher. A teacher gets paid. I've never been paid. They've never given me money, so I'm not their teacher. I'm just a dude who walks around, and then they follow me. And he wasn't wrong. What was pissing people off so much about Socrates was that he would go and question people to find out what the nature of things were, like for example, justice. Because lots of people say, like, oh, I know what justice is. I know what love is. I know what, fill in the blank of whatever important concept is. Now, he wouldn't just go to some guy who was like building a road and go, what is justice? And then the guy couldn't answer it. Ha ha, see? That's not what he did. He would go to like lawyers, advocates, judges. Oh, you're an expert in justice? Yes, I'm an expert in justice. And he'd say, awesome. I know nothing about justice. Remember, Socrates said he only knew one thing, which was that he knew nothing. So he says, I've got no idea what justice is. Can you please help me understand what justice is? And then the person would give a definition of justice. And Socrates would say, oh, thank you so much. But if that's what justice is, and then he'd ask a series of questions. And you would realize that by asking a series of questions that people have no idea what the hell they're talking about. It kind of operates like this. The world sits out in the universe. And does anybody know how the world stays in the universe without falling down? You might think it's like gravity. No, it's not that. It sits in the back of a turtle. Big, giant turtle. And guess what that turtle sits on top of? Another turtle. Come on, use your head. And what does that turtle sit on top of? Another turtle, and another turtle. Well, where's the bottom turtle? There is no bottom turtle. Turtle's all the way down. Really? That's the way a lot of people's reasoning works. So how do you know what justice is? Oh, I was taught what justice was by a teacher. Well, where'd your teacher learn about it? They learned about it from their teacher. Where'd they learn about it from? Teachers, turtles, all the way down. In other words, we might have a true belief, but we don't necessarily have true knowledge, because we haven't come to that understanding. We haven't reasoned it out to figure out what these things are. So Socrates would go to a priest and ask them, what is piety? He'd go to an advocate, what is justice? And he discovered that these people knew absolutely nothing about what they were talking about. And Socrates knew this, by the way. And so he did this very intentionally. So now what happens is that some young people will hear him and go, oh, did you hear how he just tore that priest apart? Let's go see what else this guy has to say. And then they start following him around. And Socrates is that little dumpy man would go, people following me. He would start walking to the next place. He'd go find a judge. So what is justice? Dude, he just ripped that guy apart. It'd be like if someone came in here and saw me and was like, Scarlett, yes? Oh yeah, I'm Scarlett, nice to meet you. Oh, I've heard you're a philosopher. Yes. I'm sorry, yes, I am a philosopher. What's your area of expertise? Oh, political, moral, and ethical theories. Oh, so you know about ethics? Yes, I focus specifically on how to live the good life. Wonderful. So can you help me understand what the good life is? Oh, I'd be happy to, and demonstrate for all of my students how wise I really am. And so he asked me, what is the good life? And I say, the good life is a life that is lived virtuously. And he goes, thank you. Now I finally understand. Actually, if I get a minute of your time, of course, I always have time for one who's willing to learn. Well, what is virtue? Well, virtue is proper moral behavior. Okay, well, so how do you determine proper moral behavior? Are you talking about moral behavior in the sense that it's approved by the gods? Or do you mean proper moral behavior in the sense that it's approved by man and society? Because if it's approved by man and society, you have to recognize that, therefore, it changes depending on time and place and geography and the audience, which means there's no such thing as a proper virtue. There's only an accepted virtue, which means that in one society, slavery could be virtuous, and then you can fast forward later, it's unvirtuous, and then it can be virtuous again. So there's no one thing that's ever perpetually in virtue. You know what? I wish I had time, but I need to finish this stuff on Socrates. So could you please get out of here? This is what Socrates would do. So you can imagine now what happened. You guys would all go to lunch and go, dude, did you see that guy? Just tore Skeleton apart, man. I wonder who he was. Maybe you go online and find his Instagram, start following him. And then you see him going around and around to different places and doing that to people. And then what happens is you hear that, and then you show up in your math class, and your math teacher says, today we're going to learn about the Pythagorean theorem. I'm going to call it serum. The Pythagorean theorem. Yes. What do we call it? Well, because it comes from the famous mathematician. How do you know? And all of a sudden, you guys start imitating what you see this guy on Instagram doing. And then finally someone comes along and says, dude, we can't have this. People are asking too many questions. They're not accepting what we're telling them. And if they don't accept what we're telling them, it's only a matter of time before they completely overhaul society and our whole narrative falls apart. You know? No, I didn't say Joe Rogan's name. So if you allow people to follow somebody and learn how to ask questions, it becomes very dangerous for a society. It becomes very dangerous for the society as it presently is. But the society as it presently is not necessarily the society as it should be. Now understand, there are problems that go along with that. We might think, well yeah, then things should be torn apart, things should be torn down. Well, good luck. Good luck, because if a revolution comes, first off, the revolution is probably not going to be the way you think it is. And if it does come, you have to live for a long time under the ramifications of that. Meaning that if all of the systems fall apart, right now you might be pissed because you can't get hot Cheetos at Walmart every time you go there because the supply chain is destroyed. Imagine if you can't get meat and food, general food at these places. Because that's what happens after the revolution. The revolution, things don't necessarily get better. Maybe long term they do. Maybe. But in the short term, there's a tremendous amount of suffering that has to happen. So we should be careful with these things. So we don't want to poo-poo it and say, they were just worried that they're going to lose their power. Yes, but there also would have been major ramifications for that, for everybody. So anyway, Socrates says no one ever paid him. His students, those people had free will. They could follow him wherever they wanted, and he couldn't stop them. I can't stop them if they follow me around. And then finally, he argues that nobody who is purported to be his student has ever been made worse by his teachings. And he was prepared to bring in, he was prepared to bring in the families of people who were his, purported to be his students to demonstrate that. Now, working against Socrates was the fact that some of his students did do some out there stuff. They may have burned some things down, they may have caused some chaos in Athens, and then when they were caught for it, they may have said, we're Socrates' students, which of course makes Socrates look bad. I understand you, Socrates. So in short, what I want you to get from this is that he's found guilty. The jury is around 501. I've heard anywhere from 501 and I've heard 602. We don't know exactly how big the jury was. We just know that it was a big jury. And Plato tells us that the vote was close. The vote was only separated by 30 votes. So we're talking about 501 or 602. 30 votes is a very, very narrow margin. So we don't know exactly how big it was. We just know that it was very close. Now, because of that, Athenian custom allows the convicted person to determine their own punishment. So Socrates, the prosecution comes forward and says, impiety, corrupting the youth, Socrates must die. Socrates comes out and they ask him, so what do you think? What is your punishment going to be? And he offers the following. He says, listen, I understand that what I've been convicted of is incredibly serious. Impiety, corrupting the youth, these are very serious charges. And so I feel that my punishment should be the equivalent of a $1,000 fine. So today, like $1,000. And he said, I don't have $1,000, but my purported students have $1,000. My friends do so, they've all agreed to pay it on my behalf. That would be like if you were charged with treason, trying to overthrow the United States government by selling nuclear secrets or something like that, and they ask you, what should your penalty be? And you're like, $1,000. It's an insult. And then secondly, he says, I should also be given lunch for life at the Prytaneum. At the Prytaneum. The Prytaneum was an honor that was only allowed to Olympic champions. It was a hall that sat in Athens, up on a hill, and it was only open every few years for the champions of the Olympic Games. So if you were like a laurel winner or gold medal winner, you were allowed one banquet at this place, and it was considered an enormous honor. Socrates says, I should be given lunch every day at the Prytaneum, because I'm the greatest champion that Athens has ever known. And by the way, he says, my daimonion, which tells me when to stop, is not telling me to stop. So I'm going to keep going. And he says that his fine should be $1,000, roughly. Because if a civilization can't stand up to the questions of one old man, that's all it's worth, $1,000. It should go away. He drops the mic. He walks off the stage and he says, I leave you all to your judgments. As you can imagine, the jury comes back. Death. Overwhelmingly, they vote for death for Socrates. They say Socrates must die. Just to be aware of some things. Now, when we look at why they went after Socrates so hard, there's a lot of reasons. I've mentioned all of them already. But just to put them on the one page. First off, he was highly critical of poets. Melos was a poet. I think that's the weakest one. I don't know that that's exactly why. Yeah, Melos maybe had a specific axe to grind because he was a poet. But remember Socrates, Plato, they said that all poets were liars. So they didn't like poetry. In fact, Plato, when he's writing this book called The Republic, he's trying to establish like the perfect society. He says that poets would be banned. There would be no poetry. So you guys might love it. He was extremely critical of Athens and of democracy. Remember, he said that democracy is the second to worst possible political system. And he goes around telling everybody how much better Sparta is than Athens. He was a close friend of Alcibiades, who I mentioned before was a traitor. In fact, Alcibiades brags and says, Socrates saved my life. That's my guy. I also mentioned that he tutored Critias, who was the leader of the occupiers. When Sparta defeated Athens, they sent in 70 people, who the Athenians called the 70 tyrants. They ruled over Athens. And Socrates went and tutored them to teach them about Athens and the ways of philosophy. And then finally, he was a role model to the youth. He encouraged them to ask questions and to get to the bottom of some things by asking questions. But people who are in power don't want you to be at the bottom of things. And by the way, the bottom of things is heavy. It's very, how do I say it? There's almost nowhere that's more uncomfortable to be than at the bottom of some deep issues. But there's also nowhere that's more rewarding to be than at the bottom of some deep issues. This is why it's not for everybody. Some people, well, most people, we just kind of accept them as they are. There are those few people who dig and dig to get to the bottom because what they're asking for, no, what they're demanding is truth. Truth before comfort. Yeah.
I think that's where Socrates proves like how we went from to a democracy to a tyranny, like solely by them outright saying he deserved death. Like they just went from that to tyranny.
Exactly. They went from, well, barely convicting him. I don't know if this guy did it. I don't know. Oh, you trash talked us? Die, bastard. Yeah, they did. That jury degenerated quickly, very quickly.